As he does every year, the governor has delivered his annual governor's budget address. What was in Governor Wolf's address for 2020? What can families and businesses across our state of Pennsylvania expect? Representative Gordon Denlinger, the state director of the National Federation for Independent Business here in Pennsylvania, joins us to break down that address and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm your host, Sam Chen. As he does every year, the governor of Pennsylvania has delivered the annual governor's budget address. In many ways, it's similar to the President's State of the Union, delivered every year to set an agenda for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So what was in Governor Wolf's address this year? And how is it going to impact you, your family, your community, and our business community? Joining me to break down those questions is friend of the show, former state representative, and the state director of the NFIB here in Pennsylvania, the Honorable Gordon Denlinger. Gordon, welcome back to the program. Thanks so much for being here and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Sam. Same to you, and great to be back again with you.
It's always a privilege to have you here, and I appreciate the clarity that you break down all these questions with, and I know our viewers do too, so thank you for always taking the time.
Well, thank you for that.
Let's talk governor's budget address. This is done every year. It's similar to a State of the Union, but at a state level. And the governor lays out his or her agenda for the state for that next fiscal year. This is the governor's, I believe, sixth address.
That's correct.
Yeah. So what's new? What's different? Let's start with the 30,000-foot level. Did anything in this address surprise you? Is there anything that is absolutely shocking to those who are watching this?
Well, for round six, as you say, the governor displays amazing consistency of program. And in short answer to your question, not a lot of surprises in it. But the governor, and to set the stage a little, it is a joint session similar to, as you say, the State of the Union. So the Senate comes marching over into the House chamber. The governor addresses with the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor sitting on chairs behind him, similar to Pence and Pelosi. Yeah. So that's kind of the visual. But no, the governor, of course, is generally well received. He's a likable gentleman. That said, of course, he's a far left politician from a policy standpoint. And so his budget reflects those priorities. Similar to other years, he did not call for broad-based tax increases. He tried that. The first year. It was a
debacle of a budget that
indeed.
His own caucus rejected soundly.
They did. It extended months, toward the end of the year. So he realizes that that's dead on arrival. That said, he's always pushing the envelope, though, on spending wherever he can. And there are maneuvers that you can do within the budget to try to push the envelope, so to speak. He came back to some consistent themes. One of those is a severance tax on natural gas. He has a program, second year, calling for what's called Restore PA, and that would be a $4.5 billion bonding program serviced by a severance tax.
Sure. It's an infrastructure program.
It is. Okay. It would be sort of going around the state with the big checks, if you will, handing out the money, but it would be to fund infrastructure improvements. So the consistency there, again, severance tax, which again is likely dead on arrival in the General Assembly. He did call for $1 billion to be spent on lead and asbestos remediation within public schools, and that's viewed as worthwhile and certainly a worthy thing to be doing. $1 billion is a serious commitment of funds. Some other issues, he called for something called a scholarship fund for our state system universities and colleges, which would be diverted from the horse race fund, which was set up to save the horse industry in and around the creation of the gambling industry in Pennsylvania. He would divert the $250 million roughly from that horse fund over to student scholarships for state universities. That's already running into problem, not only on the Republican side, but also the Democratic side. So that was there. But the one thing that he has tended to do in the last couple cycles is through, I guess you'd say, the pushing the envelope on the revenue estimate. That's how much we're going to draw from our major sources of taxation. If you make the estimate really rosy, and then you can like pump up the spending on the other side of that equation to get to a balance. If in fact Pennsylvania is as healthy economically as he's projecting, then Donald Trump becomes the winner.
Sure.
At the presidential level.
That's a good point.
So for a Democrat to say, "Hey, good times are here again," it's kind of interesting. But that said, I do think he's been over aggressive on those revenue estimates, and the spending would travel along with that. In big numbers, Pennsylvania's budget's about $36 billion. The increase is $1.6 billion over the prior year, or about 6% increase in spending.
And so if we're going to take that into account of the economic growth, that's a 6% growth over the course of the next year to match that. If we're going revenue neutral here.
And GDP growth,
right.
We're not calling for that at the national
Sure.
or state level.
Sure.
So again, it's a reach, we
Sure.
would say.
Before we delve into some of the finer points, I do have to ask. This is the first 4 budget addresses. The lieutenant governor was Mike Stack, who is now a comedian.
Yes.
On the comedic tour out in the Los Angeles area. It is now the former mayor of Braddock, Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman,
yes.
who quite literally stands heads and shoulders above Speaker Turzai and Governor Wolf.
And everybody in the room.
Is
He's a tall guy.
Do the cameras struggle to capture when they stand up for the State of the Union?
Well, for the standing parts, the invocation and the pledge, yes, there's a contrast there. Seated, he seems to be sort of in the zone. But he's an interesting individual in the statewide political scene. The lieutenant governor's claim to fame these days is, of course, pushing for legalized marijuana,
yes.
cannabis, and recreational, which would go beyond our current medical
Correct.
provisions. That's been a big push. He is, by his own definition, a socialist,
yes.
In the Bernie Sanders vein. And so he's another part of the mix. Certainly has gubernatorial aspirations, so keep an eye on.
Had run for Senate previously.
He had, and certainly is the darling of the far left
yes.
of the young Democratic Party.
Right. So I always found that interesting, and it's always interesting to see him wear a suit as well, in his famous closet of black shirts.
He's actually broken out into colors on neckties.
Oh, wow.
I noticed
okay.
For a while we just had black, and now we're getting colors. So he's migrating to more standard apparel.
Oh my goodness. I want to ask you about some of the specifics in that package, and we started with a very big number, $36 billion. Again, we're looking at 6% growth to match that. Now, part of this, the governor has not proposed increasing the sales or the income tax. That was part of his first proposal, which, as we said earlier, did not go over very well. There are proposals in here about severance taxes. There is talk of a targeted fee on municipalities. How is he going to account for the deficit in increased spending if we do not reach that 6% growth?
Well, and that's the point of concern with the budget is, are we really just opening up a hole that's going to have to be plugged one way or another? They have their, different reserve pools, places to go to plug in dollars, accounting magic, if you will. So they can do some short-term fixes. We do have $300 million in the rainy day fund at this point, so they have put aside a little money if the economy were to head south. But I think as we go through the budget process, the Republicans who control the Senate and the House are going to try to rein this in a little bit. And so as opposed to $1.6 billion, does the answer become $1 billion or 800 million? I think that's probably the negotiated compromise that we'll end up with down the road.
A few of the things that if you're reading reports that are coming out, a few of the things that are catching a lot of people's attention, and again, not necessarily new ideas from this governor or from his caucus, but the increase of minimum wage, which he is saying at $12 per hour as opposed to 15 or 20, which others in his party favor. He is advocating to move the minimum wage up to $12 per hour.
Well, it's 12 with a plan to get to 15.
So it's 12 in the interim.
12 would be the first, and then there's steps to get to 15.
Up to 15.
So it is a path to 15.
Okay. Obviously, adding more funding toward education. We talked about the situation with the Racehorse Development Trust, but also raising that minimum salary for teachers to $45,000. And then he did also bring up gun control and the talk of increased background checks, red flag laws. A few of the things that have come up in conversation since that budget address. What is the likelihood of these things making it through both houses and back to the governor's desk?
It's all politics is local at the end of the day. So, the coalition, which on the Democratic side is becoming more fascinating by the day and by the hour. And that is the great divide. You have the more socialist far left members. You have what are coming to be called legacy Democrats, and that's kind of the old Kennedy Union, sort of traditional Democrats, who make up a vast majority of their registration across the state. But coming out of the urban centers, we see the more socialist side, and we see, in some cases where legacy Democrats are being primaried by socialists, and there's this effort at purification. So the Democratic caucus, both House and Senate in Pennsylvania, are sort of divided at this point. And it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out on these policy points that you're mentioning. And I'll give an example of that. The governor had put together with different interests an effort to move the minimum wage from its current federal level of $7.25 per hour up to $9.50. He had a program to do that and ran into major opposition within the House Democratic caucus, his own party, because it wasn't 15. And when you've beat the drum for 15, the perfect, in that sense, becomes the enemy of the good.
Right.
And so literally he ran into problems within his own party on only going to $9.50. And the question is, you mentioned the $12 proposal, is that enough? Well, it's only enough if he keeps emphasizing quick path to 15.
Right.
That's the sort of the mantra that's out there. So divided Democratic caucuses, House and Senate, and the governor kind of straddling that from a policy standpoint. You did mention the guns issue, and I would say over half of his address focused on gun issues. But Pennsylvania, historically, both Democrats in more rural areas and the Republican side, very, very strong on Second Amendment rights issues. There's certainly an emotional element to all of that, and who doesn't feel for that? I'm sure I do, you do, we all do. That said, is there some adjustment to background checks or, a look at red flag that could come into play? My sense within the General Assembly, House and Senate, is he would have a problem on both sides of the aisle on those issues.
Wow. That's good to know. Last question before we cut the break. What happens from here? Both houses now need to consider the budget. When is their deadline? What happens? I think anyone that remotely watches Pennsylvania politics knows what happens. But what happens if we don't reach that deadline?
Well, where we head to now is some weeks of budget hearings, both the House and the Senate. We'll bring in all of the cabinet secretaries and ask them to defend the budget that the governor submitted. And beyond that, then I guess you'd say the horse trading starts to begin. And really gets down to crunch time in the month of June. Constitutionally, there is a June 30th mandate for them to have that completed. That doesn't mean they always do, but that is the constitutional deadline. And they've done better in recent cycles. Now, this is an election year. Both sides have a vested interest in getting her done and getting out of town on or about June 30th. So I expect pretty close to on-time budget this year.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Gordon, I want to pick up right where we left off in this conversation about the governor's budget, but I want to shift a little bit to what does it actually mean for people who are watching, for people who own businesses, have families, are going to school, putting their kids through school, working jobs. How does this all translate? So let's kind of start at the top. We look at big numbers, $36 billion, 6% growth in the economy. Numbers are great. As we tell every client that comes through my firm, at some point, numbers don't translate to everyday. Does my paycheck grow? Does my paycheck shrink? Do I have to pay more? Do I pay less? What do those numbers mean to the backbone of America, to people who are working jobs and trying to provide for their families?
Sure. You know, the absence of broad-based tax increases probably means not all that much in a certain sense. You know, the growth of government, its size and scope, you know, it's on a gradual increased trajectory over time. And that's, you know, both Republican and Democratic governors and administrations. Yeah, as far as, you know, your personal income tax, sales tax, what you're, you know, shelling out when you go into a store, really not a lot of change on those sort of basic issues. You know, I think there are maybe concerns about Pennsylvania that are, you know, longer term, demographic in nature. You know, we're an aging state, a lot of legacy issues and costs that are maybe longer term points of concern. As far as the budget itself, I would say probably not a lot of direct impact. Now, I'm going to qualify that here real quickly and add that I think one of the big sleeper issues for 2020 is the property tax issue.
Okay.
There's some bubble up starting to happen on that issue. And that's a whole nother show, Sam, that we could certainly
absolutely.
do. But that said, House Bill 76, which has been, a couple decades or more, of course, Sam Rohr, former Representative Sam Rohr back in the day, Dave Argall, Senator, now being the lead person on that. They've been holding some rallies in Under the Dome here recently. There are some other plans that are surfacing which also call for elimination or dramatic reduction in property tax. So keep an eye on that one. I think as this year moves on, significant property tax reform could pop out and be on the agenda. The other one is business tax reform initiatives, and I'm hearing from the majority House leadership, which would be the Republican side, that taking a good hard look at some business tax reforms are also on the agenda. But within the budget itself, pretty straightforward, not a lot of issue day to day.
Sure. One of the things that I think could pop up, obviously if property tax reform comes, business tax reform comes, it's going to change a lot of the tax structure, and we'll have to revisit this conversation. In the address itself, one of the things that potentially has more impact, maybe not economically, is a lot of the conversation about education. Investing more into the state-run system, the state schools across our Commonwealth, increasing the minimum for teacher pay in public school districts. That idea of just putting more into our students' education. This has also been on the national scene, and there's been quite a divide between, for example, Senator Sanders arguing for the cancellation of student debt, as well as making colleges free. And then there are others. James Carville, the legendary Democrat strategist, recently went off saying that this is just not something that is feasible. This is crazy talk, as he says. How does the governor's proposal rank in that world, as well as what does that actually mean for students who are watching this and saying, well, that's great, you're throwing numbers out. What does it mean for my education? What's changing? What's staying? What opportunities am I gaining or losing?
Well, let's start at the K through 12 public school level first. I would say if you were to have Tom Wolf, the governor, sitting here in the chair where I am, and you were to ask him, what would you like your legacy to be? I think public school funding would be at or near the top. He certainly has been consistent every year with increases in funding. And Pennsylvania puts a lot of money into its public schools. You know, you hear different things. We pay our teachers second highest in the nation. You know, in terms of, you know, what we send to districts on per pupil spending, we're in the top 5 or 6 among states. I mean, it's not like Pennsylvania hasn't channeled a lot of money there. And I would say House Speaker Turzai, Republican from Allegheny, Pittsburgh area, he has joined in that effort to pump up public school funding. So, you know, to the charge that, you know, we're not spending on public schools, false. We absolutely are. You did mention the increase in minimum teacher salary. That's probably going to happen. I would say that would be an easy get through the assembly piece. Quite frankly, because its current statutory minimum is so far below what everybody starts teachers at, that to take it up 10 or 15,000 would affect virtually nobody. So moving that up certainly could happen, and I do believe that it will. But moving over into the collegiate realm, I think one of the sort of lurking big problems we have is our state system schools, 14 that are in the state system. And in a time of declining enrollments, and people can't balance the books, what happens to all these schools? And is there a need to look seriously at making some hard decisions, like some mergers, like collapsing a few of these together? Nobody wants their school to go away, we know that. But we're coming to a crisis point in the funding of that system. And all of the small private schools are also challenged, in the money sector. That said, the pay for free educations for everybody. I'm on the James Carville side of that. To your earlier thought there, that's it's just impossible, quite frankly. If you want to destroy the finances of a nation overnight, that's probably the way to do it. The money just doesn't exist, but it makes a great stump speech, and who doesn't, when they're, 25, they've come through a college. My kids ended up with some student debt, so I'm very personally familiar with that. That said, I do think there needs to be some more truth at the front end of our process. Sitting down with a young person, say, look, this 4-year degree or 4+ master's degree is going to leave you with $200,000 in debt for a job that's going to pay you $35,000 a year. That's not going to work. Let's restart this conversation. I do fault some of our institutions that have led kids down these roads.
It's almost as a business transaction as opposed to actually looking at what is best for the student.
Absolutely right. And just putting kids into these programs is questionable. That said, no, I do not see a way at the state level, particularly for us to channel significant funds into paying off student debt at this point.
Quick question to wrap up. Looking at the governor's budget proposal, the taxes, the different fees, the structures of tax reform, the education factor of it, so forth. What's the response to the governor?
I guess it is, thank you, Governor. The General Assembly will take it from here. No, everybody has
forever
a seat at the table. Forever. Yeah, there we go. Kindness first. But, no, the Assembly, generally tries to come and give the governor some wins in the equation. Of course, House and Senate in the other party's hands means they're going to dominate the conversation. But ultimately, the governor has to affix his signature to it as well. So getting to a landing place that's negotiated, probably more modest again than what he initially calls for. But the governor, needs a few wins out of this, as does both the House and the Senate.
Good. Forever the statesman is what we appreciate about you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Gordon, thank you again for your time and for really breaking down what sometimes is a very complex but very important conversation. I want to close asking you, the National Prayer Breakfast just occurred not too long ago. Again, big annual tradition, similar to the State of the Union address or the governor's budget address in Washington, D.C. And this year's keynote speaker was Arthur Brooks, who's the past president of the American Enterprise Institute. And Brooks delivered what has become controversial remarks focusing on the concept of loving our enemies. And the idea of an enemy not being someone that we simply have a difference of preference with, but someone who is an enemy, that these are deeply rooted, deep-seated disagreements, arguments, perhaps even to the level of dissonance and hatred. And Brooks quotes Jesus on this and says, we need to love those people. You're a man of deep faith convictions. You've served in the public sector. You continue to serve today. What does that mean for you? Where are the challenges, and how do you do that?
Well, theologically, Arthur Brooks is exactly right. Ultimately, the summarization of the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments that Christ gave, was to love the Lord with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. So I think Arthur's on very sound footing with that. in the political arena, and there, I think, are not enough times when this is exercised, but there does become that time to pull back and not, just go to the nth degree to blow up somebody because they don't hold to your political view. So, I would love to see more of that in the public sphere, where we do display that concern for people who are different than us, who again, we don't agree with them, but I think it is correct. Love our neighbor as we love ourselves needs to be lived out in the public sphere.
Yeah. I certainly think you've done a fabulous job of it and set an example of it in your public service career. And so for that, I thank you.
Well, I too many failures there, Sam, but thank you for those words. I'll take it as an encouragement.
And we all grow together, and I've certainly had my fair share of failures in that world as well. But a very, very good and humble reminder for all of us in the public sphere.
Absolutely right. Couldn't agree more.
Gordon, thank you again. And that is all the time that we have tonight. My thanks to you for tuning in and joining us. Continue this conversation with us online. Just remember to use the hashtag #FaceTheIssues. And tune in again next week. And on behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, my name is Sam Chen, wishing you and yours a wonderful evening.